So this is what happens when you live alone during a global health pandemic and you're a bit obsessed with the post-war architecture of your hometown. Or maybe it's why I live alone, probably a good reason. But yeah, so this is the Magnum in Irvine, Irvine's famous leisure centre. Uh, you might be wondering why on earth would I go to the lengths to recreate this quite boring looking building in a kid's video game. Um, and trust me, there are some very good reasons for that. So I've got this ongoing personal kind of research project into Irvine Newtown, um, kind of researching the origins of the new town and its significance within Britain's new town movement. And the Magnum formed quite an integral part of Irvine New Town plan in the first stages. Um, one of the kind of key features with Irvine was that it was the only new town in Britain with a coastline, with a seaside, which you can see I've made no effort to build yet. Um, and at the time, when Irvine was designated a new town, the whole kind of beach park area was largely industrial estate or disused ordnance factory land with kind of chemical bins and things like that, waste ground. So IDC, Irvine Development Corporation, wanted to try and make the most of Irvine's harbour side and the seaside and to celebrate it. And part of that was plonking a great big leisure centre down at the shore to try and draw people down there. So it formed quite a pivotal part of the new town plan, and it was one of the few big parts of the original plan that they actually implemented. So it was really quite an important building from that point of view, and it put Irvine on the map in a lot of ways. I kind of grew up as a kid in the 90s, and even in my generation, but especially in the generation before mine, my parents. If you said to anyone that you came from Irvine, they would say, "Oh, that's where the Magnum is." Everyone knew about it. It really kind of put Irvine on the national stage when it wasn't before. So quite a powerful legacy, really, for this kind of big plain white box. Anyway, so that's just some kind of rationale behind why I've done this, and I guess why the Magnum was where it was. There was quite a sort of potent political impetus at the time in the 1960s and 70s to get this building constructed and to have the local authority at the time, Irvine Town Council, have them seen to be involved with it. So a lot of the drawings from the time have the borough architect. His name is on a lot of the drawings, and that was at his insistence, I've been told. But in fact, much of the design was down to two. There was a whole design team, but really it was two architects that worked for Irvine Development Corporation, Mac Dunlop and Vernon Monaghan, who were in their sort of late 20s, early 30s at the time. So two young, quite, they wouldn't be jaded and cynical yet, two young, optimistic architects who had this kind of clean slate to work with in a new town and were really trying to create something special for the town in this leisure centre. Leisure centres were a really big deal at the time in the late 60s and early 70s. There was talk of a 4-day week coming in because people weren't going to have to work more, or were going to have to work less as time goes by. And it was kind of projected that that trend was going to continue as time went on. So planners and architects felt that there was going to be a very real need in the future to cater to all this free time that people were going to have. Hence, these leisure centres sprung up. Sorry, I should say, if you're just expecting a kind of quick whiz through tour of the Magnum, that's not what you're going to get. It will include that, but I'm going to bore you to death with facts and the history of the Magnum as well, because it is really interesting. There's a lot of interesting stuff to say about it, I think. It's been really useful from my point of view, reconstructing it to try and understand the design, and try and appreciate what the architects were trying to do with it and why they did things in a certain way. And I think having it, clean and new like this shows the clarity of the design. There's a very kind of strong horizontal element through it that I actually think is quite reminiscent of the Commonwealth Pool in some ways, if people know that, the Commie Pool in Edinburgh, which is a Category A listed building. The Magnum was designed on, I think it's a 5 metre grid, so each one of these grey pillars is at 5 metre centres. Each block in Minecraft is a metre across, which does kind of limit me slightly, so all the walls are a metre wide. But it was basically designed in this grid, so very regular, quite a rational design. And you have this central spine running through it. It was termed a central spine with the kind of walkway that you had running down the middle of the Magnum. Part of the reason for having that linear design was that it continued the sort of design vocabulary, I guess, that was being developed for the town centre building, which ended up being the Mall. So the Mall was designed as a mega structure, which was a kind of unusual building type at the time in the late 60s, that was intended to have everything under one roof, and to keep people, pedestrians, separate from cars, from traffic. So the intention with the Mall, which is kind of looming over there, I've started building phase 2 of the Mall, which was never built but sits where Asda sits now, so that's what that is. That's me kind of making a start on phase 2. The intention with that was to continue this linear building with its own central spine over the railway, through the harbour side, blootering everything in the harbour side. It was almost all of it was going to be demolished, right the way to the foreshore. You can see I've kind of very roughly put in the Garnock and the Irvine estuaries there, but it all needs kind of reworked. So the plan was to continue that and eventually have it join up with the Magnum. So people might remember the Magnum had these quite weird looking windows at first floor level that kind of jutted out, full height windows. It's just like the walkway ended, and I remember being a kid and thinking, why on earth is that like that? What's going on there? And the intention was to have the mega structure plug into that eventually, so connect it all as one continuous building that would be about 1.5 kilometers long. Huge building, huge ambition. Obviously didn't happen. The short version of that is they ran out of money, and the blast zone for ICI Ardeer, just across the river, was really tightened up in the 70s because of a disaster at another ICI plant down south, and that basically put the kibosh on any development down in the harbour side until the 1990s, when IDC built the Maritime Museum and lots of kind of housing that's designed more to blend in, completely different from this very stark, very clean, crisp modernism. With the design, the architects were trying to take a lot of influence from buildings that were being constructed at World's Fairs at the time. So in particular, they were looking at Montreal 1967 and Osaka 1970. So Expo 67 and Expo 70 were these kind of big iconic World's Fairs where a lot of quite impressive architecture was constructed, big pavilions and halls that had huge spans in the roof, accommodating massive open spaces indoors, which hadn't really been seen before. Most buildings, just basic engineering, they need pillars to support the roofs, whereas now architects were able to design buildings that didn't need that. So the Magnum took a lot of influence from those buildings to accommodate the big open spaces that you need for the sort of leisure facilities that it was going to contain. I've got a cup of tea. If you don't have one, I would recommend getting one, because I'm going to ramble on. Right, I need a bed. One of the quirks of Minecraft is that various monsters come out at night, which sort of spoils the aesthetic. Right, we'll get into it soon, don't worry. So it was opened in 1975. The Queen opened it, and it was demolition started a little over 41 years later in 2017. And you would never know it was there now. It's all grassed over, completely grassed over, the Magnum. And that was kind of what spurred me on to start researching the new town, because I kind of thought, well, these, what I see as iconic buildings, are going to be the historic sites of the future, so they need to be studied. Anyway, let's get torn into it, shall we? This bridge was always criticised, being very windy. Mac Dunlop said to me, it was like, well, when do you stop? You need to decide when you stop. And for whatever reason, he decided to stop without putting a roof on this. I should say there will be things in here that people will be expecting to see that they won't. That's because I've built it as constructed. The Magnum was modified a few times throughout its life. So this logo, for example, that's more or less what the original logo looked like. I've made it much bigger here because I don't have enough space. But it went through kind of 3 different brands, I think, the Magnum. So it had this kind of, the first one very kind of modern, clean, kind of in keeping with the design. The second one was the one that I remember growing up in the 90s, where there was like they used the 3 primary colours, and they had these like stick figures, like red stick figures doing various different like sports and activities and stuff like that. And that branding was kind of continued through all the signage and everything. I remember that being quite cool. And then latterly it had a kind of, I would say, slightly naff design with kind of big bold capital letters that said Magnum above the entrance. So yeah, sorry, I could go on about this for a long time. Quite a pared down design, very simple design. Again, that was intentional. They wanted it to be more about a celebration of what the building contained. So this quite austere factory-like exterior, quite industrial, was intended to be an expression of the Magnum as a fun factory. You know, this plain box, treasure chest in a way, contains all these fantastic things. Right, I promise that's it. Let's just get inside it now before this ends up being like an hour long and you've all got bored. So come in, get your tickets. Foyer. There's always a couple of skylights in the Magnum. This one looked down onto the kids' pool. Let a bit more light in. I don't know if don't really have a rational system for going through this, so let's try and do top floor first, and then I'll go downstairs. So I think in here I think that's where the Tiny Tots was. I'm not sure what this was originally. On any of the plans I've looked at, there's kind of, it looks like a viewing area here. There's basically a secondary, smaller sports hall underneath this, and it looks like there's a viewing area in here down onto that. So I'll put this video on YouTube and then share it on Twitter. So if anyone has any recollections of what this was, or any comments about any of it actually, I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts on it, because I don't really know what was there. These viewing areas, at least one of these faced down onto the mini monsters, and the other ones were down onto squash courts, I think. One thing I always remember about the Magnum was the bricks that they used. I remember as a kid, like the bricks were very, like the cement in them didn't come right up to the edge. You could like run your finger between the bricks, and the bricks were kind of made of this like flaky, dark brown, like flaky stone. Almost looks like a flake, like dark chocolate. Very kind of tactile. So the architects obviously put quite a lot of thought, I think, into the different materials they were using in its construction. And in fact, a lot of that's reflected in the mall, the shopping centre as well. The same, they kind of continued the same materials as much as continuing the sort of overall design idea. And then you had these viewing areas into the different halls, which I always remember being quite drafty and quite cold, and never saw anyone sitting at them, you know. But the intention was that you could just wander in eventually from the town centre building, just wander in, wander along, going back to your flat or whatever, and see all these different sports, different activities taking place, and see all the different things that you could try out if you wanted. Let's go downstairs. There was four stairwells in the Magnum, all identical. I think they only ever really used the middle two. I think the faraway two are basically just fire escapes. So this was the Bowls Hall, which I think they used for maybe like dog shows and stuff like that as well. Not really sure. You can see I've tried to recreate the trussed roof. So just a series of sort of pyramid shaped girders that allowed them to have these huge spans and create these massive indoor spaces. The skylights are something I've added to try and let a bit more natural light in. Just a quirk of Minecraft, it does get quite dark if you don't have torches absolutely everywhere, so it starts to look a little bit kind of medieval. But I think that gives you some idea of just how dramatically large these spaces were, really enormous. I think they had, I don't know if anyone remembers the Eliminator, I think it was called, which was like a big kind of inflatable assault course, I seem to remember, that they had for kids. And I'm sure that had that same kind of 90s Magnum branding on it, like primary colours, like it was maybe a specific thing for the Magnum that you didn't get anywhere else. Anyway, be interested to hear what anyone has to say about it. I was never really in this bit of the Magnum, I don't think. But I've got the whole thing in here, like just changing rooms, cupboards, because I wanted to try and recreate it as accurately as I possibly could, just to get an understanding of how the interior space had been used and divided up. That's that lower hall I was talking about that's below where the Tiny Tots was. And this is more or less where the Mini Monsters was, I think. On the few plans that I've got, this is labelled as I think it's a fitness salon, which I guess is what you would call a gym nowadays. Maybe they were that was their idea of like a ladies' gym area. I don't know, fitness salon, and this was a kind of weight training area. But obviously this then became squash courts, and I think this is where the Mini Monsters was, I seem to remember. Looks quite small, quite a small area, I think. I mean, obviously I remember it being massive, but when you're like 4 or 5 years old, it's going to seem enormous, isn't it? This was storage rooms for the sports hall, which we'll go into now. People will remember it always had this big net running down the middle of it, or usually did, anyway. You can see again just that very kind of rational design was quite clearly expressed on the inside of the Magnum. So they showed off the structure of it with these pillars, which you couldn't see on the outside. You can in this recreation of it, but that's just a limitation of Minecraft. And again, had that exposed trussed ceiling to kind of show off the design and the structure of it. This also had extendable kind of seating that kind of came out from here. was always folded up whenever I saw it, but I guess that was for kind of bigger events if you had spectators coming in. I realise now that I said I would do the upstairs first, and that's absolutely not what I've done, but there you go. Maybe I could go upstairs now, actually, just go back up. The bar. So the Magnum had this kind of bar area at the front, and it was designed to kind of showcase this panoramic view over, well, mud flats, I guess, the kind of bogside mud flats, which doesn't sound very glamorous, but I guess it's quite an interesting natural landscape, and gives you quite panoramic views over to like the hills behind Cowinning and up behind Largs, and then over to Arran. So on a good day, you would get a really good view, I would imagine, from the bar. Um, and again, the rationale behind having this in the Magnum, I guess, was to encourage Joe Blogs to come down and maybe get a bite to eat and then go for a wander and say, oh, maybe I'll try my hand at boxing or judo or whatever. Latterly, this became part of the gym, I think. There was definitely lots of like treadmills rode up here. Why you'd want to be in a treadmill in full view of everyone, I don't know, but that's just me. Especially when you've got all these rooms in here, you could have put treadmills in. There's viewing areas absolutely everywhere in the Magnum. See, because it's getting dark now, you get monsters appearing. Not very Magnum-like. Yeah, you get all these viewing areas. And I don't know, maybe someone else could confirm or deny this. I seem to remember there was like closed circuit TVs or something like that that allowed you to see, like if you wanted to see what was happening in the pool, there was like TVs or something like that as well as the viewing areas. I might be imagining that, I'm not sure, but I do have a kind of vague memory of that. And the kind of main viewing area, I guess, was this, which is where there was a cafe, or it was supposed to be a cafe. I seem to remember it being a kind of knockoff McDonald's or something like that, where you could get like greasy chips and like chicken nuggets and stuff like that. Slush puppies. Slush puppies were a big thing in the Magnum. Probably shouldn't be slurping my tea, that's not for YouTube, is it? You can tell I do this a lot. The ice rink. What can I say about that? It didn't have the trussed roof on show in the ice rink. It was kind of clad with what looked like tin foil, which I guess was to do with insulation. I guess keeping the ice cold. They had to keep the room very cold as well, so a form of insulation to keep it that way. The ice rink was used for curling as well. That's what those patterns at the end there were for. And the floor of the rink was like when you drained it of ice, it had this kind of rubberized floor that was very smooth and deliberately very smooth and flat to be used for various different events that might have required another big open space. And again, viewing areas absolutely everywhere. A lot of these latterly became boarded up, I seem to remember, but I do have a vague memory of being able to see through into the ice rink from the swimming pool and all around the outside as well. And a lot of these used, I think most of it would be kind of bronzed glass, brown glass, basically, but that was kind of designed to blend in with the brown brick used at ground level as well. So from the outside, it would just almost look like one continuous brown band running around the base of the building. And that kind of bronzed glazing was used in Bridgegate House and the Rivergate Centre, the shopping centre as well. So again, kind of continuing with the same use of materials throughout the town. Trying to think if there's anything else I can say about this. You had all your lockers along here, again, just changing rooms, such as what there's only so much you can do in Minecraft. Do you know what I mean? Oh yeah, could go out here actually, briefly, in fact. That's quite handy. So again, out here you have two of these big dead ends just floating in midair, which were originally glazed, but I think were bricked up. I'm guessing because people of a certain persuasion were uh, panning the windows. But you can see they had another one to the north of the Magnum, so obviously they had intentions to continue with something heading to the north as well. And actually, the original design had a second story, third floor to the Magnum, kind of on top of this grey concrete area, where they were going to have a series of club rooms facing north and south, either side of that central spine. So a series of club rooms for, like karate or boxing or skating, hockey, whatever, that could be rented out by different sports clubs to use. But that obviously didn't make it through to the final design. And you can see again the kind of brown glazing being used throughout and in the stairwells as well, that gives them quite a nice sort of vertical linear aesthetic that kind of contrasts with the horizontality, I guess, of the overall design. People will see a few kind of glaring omissions from this particular part of the Magnum that I will come to. I seem to remember this area was supposed to be a kind of glazed. This is either where the outdoor pool was supposed to go originally, or a kind of glazed like sunbathing area, something like that, I think. All this was boarded up eventually as well, all this nice glazing. Let's go back inside. What's the quickest way to get to the pool? Let me think. See what I mean? These wee guys just start appearing everywhere. Okay, pool. So obviously you had the kids' pool in here, changing rooms. I feel like was there like a little pool where you could like disinfect your feet or something like that, like one of these pools that's like just like 6 inches deep kind of thing. I'm sure the Magnum had that kind of around about here somewhere. Or maybe that was Troon Pool, but I'm sure there was something like that. I've put a kind of rough idea of changing rooms. My abiding memory of the changing rooms is pubic hair everywhere and a kind of heady concoction of bleach and urine. And the pool. So this is, I mentioned that I've reconstructed it as it was built. So this was the original layout of the pool, which you can see in, there's a couple of photos on Google that show it. It wasn't an Olympic pool, it wasn't a competition pool, it was just a kind of purely for recreation, really. And I think looking carefully at photos, it looks like the overall layout was maintained, they just modified it. So obviously you had the jacuzzi and stuff that was added, and the elephant slide and the crocodile, all that sort of stuff. And the flumes went in here, the kind of ziggy zaggy flumes, and then you had the two that came out of this external wall. People always talk about not going down the death slide because someone had like broken their arm on it. I always remember people talking about the flumes and how you couldn't go down them because kids would like break in and supposedly put nails in the flume and stuff like that. Out here, so through this wall, if you can imagine that as part of the interior, with all the pillars still there, but the walls taken away, through there is where the space bowl was and the lazy river. So there was a kind of extension put on that I didn't actually notice. I didn't realise until I started building this that it was in an extension and not part of the original building. But that obviously got put on at some point. I'm not sure when yet, to add the space bowl, lazy river, and the outdoor pool as well. I'm trying to think what else I can say about the pool. No, I think I've pretty much covered it. And there was like a viewing area in here that I've not really done anything with yet. I might try and kind of refine that a wee bit. But it gives you a kind of fairly good idea, I think, of. It's good to get a sense of the scale of it from my point of view. Oh, I know what we could go and see. The Mighty Monsters, or where the Mighty Monsters would have gone. So the Magnum originally had a rifle range, which I believe was in here at first floor level. Obviously a very long, narrow room, ideal for a rifle range. But this, at some point, got turned into the Mighty Monsters. So the floor was taken away, and those storage areas that I mentioned in the sports hall down in there, I think those were then turned into the kind of floor level for the Mighty Monsters. And anyone that was in the Mighty Monsters will remember it being quite a long and narrow room. So I think that would kind of make sense. So you'd have like the death slide was like there, wasn't it? Kind of on the right hand side, and it just went back and back and back. So yeah, they must have put a staircase in here somehow, because you definitely, I'm fairly sure you came into the Mighty Monsters at first floor height. You know, like come in, and then there was like a stairwell down here to get down to it. I suppose the only thing I've not been to yet is the theatre. So we can do that now. Try and not ramble on too much longer. So another thing the Magnum was famous for was having its theatre. This was probably the most difficult bit to recreate, obviously, where you're just working with square blocks that are quite big. Difficult to recreate a theatre that was basically a big kind of slice of a circular pie. But I did my best with my limited Minecrafting abilities. I was never really in the theatre, but whenever you talk to anyone about it, they talk about it being a fantastic wee theatre. I think it could seat something like 400 people or something like that, so it was pretty substantial. Um, and there's good photographs. I don't know if I mentioned at the start of this, there's a photographic record of the Magnum on Canmore, which is a website of Historic Environment Scotland. So they undertook a photographic survey of the Magnum shortly before it closed. And there's good photographs of all of it, but it does kind of show how much detail, I guess, went into the theatre in particular. Really quite sculptural, a lot of it. Very nice kind of post-war, mid-century theatre. Where all sorts of people played, apparently. Big Country, Bjork, Bucks Fizz, Chuck Berry, The Clash, Deacon Blue, The Jam, Madness, Runrig, Shack Attack, The Smiths, Thin Lizzy, UB40. So it was a fully fledged like venue for acts to come to. I only remember it because my sister, when she was wee, was at Janice Marshall's School of Dance, and they did their like ballet show here. So I'm going to rope my sister into going through all this for me and checking for me to see if I've got all the backstage stuff right, if she can remember it. Because I've managed to squeeze in most of it, or kind of more or less what it would have looked like. So you can go right the way back to get to the projector room and stuff like that, which is quite nice. Again, there's like no detail in it because there's only so much you can do. But again, from my point of view, understanding how they fit all that in and how it all relates is quite helpful. I am now lost in my own design. Okay, back out. And I think that's pretty much it. I'm pretty sure I've covered every room there. I guess there's also the plant rooms and stuff like that I've not gone into, but that really would bore you rigid. So all this stuff in here, I think this is a cooling tower, I'm not really sure. But the Magnum must have had a lot of equipment and machinery for keeping the ice rink cold and keeping the pools warm. So all the doors in here basically lead into different plant rooms and storage rooms that they had for storing all that equipment. And that's basically it. I've probably rambled on way too long and probably missed out a few things. Just trying to think quickly. But if I have, and if anyone isn't bored to death of looking at this yet, please let me know and I will happily go around anything that I've missed. Could also show people the mall at some point if they'd be interested, which I'm slowly chipping away on. That in particular has been really useful to try and understand that, because it's outwardly it's just a big box, but it's actually quite a complicated building. Anyway, there you go. That is the Magnum recreated in Minecraft. Maybe I'll do it in Lego next.